Welcome to the Art Colony, a podcast about art and art history in Provincetown. My name is Gaston Lacombe. There's nothing like visiting an artist studio, if they let you, of course. Seeing an artist at work, seeing art in progress, is a good reminder that art is not just about final products. There's a whole process, a whole history, and a whole journey behind each piece. And there's also a physical space behind the art, a space that by its shape, its amplitude, its sounds, and its light ends up influencing how artists approach their creations. And then there's talking to the artist, discovering the personality behind the work, exploring the ideas and the influences that led to that final piece. In short, there's nothing like visiting an artist studio. I was reminded of this a few weeks ago when today's guest invited me to visit her studio. I went in with a vague idea of who the artist was and left with a deep appreciation and respect for her and her work. And our guest today is a multidisciplinary artist, art educator, curator, and recipient of the 2024 Award for Artistic Excellence from the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. So let's welcome to the Art Colony, Megan Hinton.
Thanks, Gaston.
How are you?
I'm very happy to be here.
I'm very happy
Thanks
you're
for
here
inviting
too.
me. Yeah.
Well, a lot of people have been wanting to see you on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of
That's
people
nice.
that said, you need Megan to come on the podcast.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
So tell our listeners, who is Megan Hinton?
Megan Hinton is, like you said, an interdisciplinary artist. I'm, talking about Megan Hinton as an artist. I'm a painter, and I'm primarily a painter, and I work in a versatility of paint. Mostly I work in oil, but I also work in gouache, and I work in ink, which I think is a painterly drawing medium, and sometimes acrylics. And but I also kind of am a sculptor more recently. Megan Hinton as an artist is someone who's like deeply investigating other artists' work. And I'm doing that mostly for my own interest. I actually became a painter through looking at paintings. I always say I became a painter because I wanted to paint what I was seeing. I wanted to somehow access painting through what I was looking at in art history, and contemporary art in general. But I'm also, like you said, I'm an educator. I've been an educator for a long time, youth and adult ed and college level ed and stuff like that. And more recently, some curatorial work. I've curated a few shows at PAM, and that's been a wonderful opportunity. I also love the beach. I love shellfish. I love being in this queer community. I like gardening. I like walking great distances. I like having dinner parties with my friends and talking and laughing. And just like anyone, just sort of interested in pleasure. I'm also pretty critical of maybe the world and how things are kind of laid out, maybe particularly in this day and age. And in terms of back to art, I'm also like to keep a critical eye on what I'm seeing, and that not in a kind of egregious critical way, but sort of questioning of what is happening like immediately around us or in a broader scope beyond here on Outer Cape Cod. Finally, I'll just answer this. I think this is the best way to end. Who is Megan Hinton? I think people probably would assume that I'm an extrovert, confident extrovert, and I'm actually really an introvert. I spend a lot of time alone in my studio walking, and I have a partner, Paul Erickson, and we spend a lot of time together. But really, I'm a pretty insular person who's interested in working out ideas and sort of thinking about things and just sort of being with myself. That's
Maybe you're like me. You're an extroverted introvert.
yeah, that an extroverted introvert, right? Yeah, I definitely can identify with that.
So where does your story start?
In terms of being an artist,
Or just in terms
just
of
in
being
general.
Megan? Yeah.
Well, I was born in Ohio. I was born in Sandusky, Ohio, which is a small city that, particularly when I was born in the 70s, was very heavily, the industry was about automaking. That kind of flattened out in the 80s, and the town actually became rather depressed, except I had a nice upbringing in that I lived on Lake Erie, and it's like basically it's a lake, but it's very there's a lot of correlations between that kind of activity life of the beach and everything and here on the Outer Cape. So I grew up on the water. I played a lot of sports with my father and on teams, and I was sort of this very physical kind of child. And it's about when I was probably around 16, and I got really interested in art and particularly the physicality of it and this idea of drawing, which is there's a level of eye hand coordination as in sports, and that interests me. And it seemed like through making things that I could to start to think in a different way. And I went on to study art and kept studying it and really didn't study anything else except for art history and a little bit of history as well. I've got typical wash ashore, like many of us. My mother moved to Nantucket when I was 19, which is, an island off the coast of Cape Cod here. And it sort of brought me out this way. And I met a mentor of mine, a painter who brought me to Provincetown, and particularly when I was coming out in my early 20s. And we had the fortunate experience of staying with Sally Nerber at the Cherrystone Gallery in Wellfleet. They were friends. And I saw that there was this sort of enclave out here of really interesting artists. And of course, Sally Nerber was showing a lot of what I think are very important baby boomer artists on the Outer Cape, Paul Bowen, Janice Redmond, Nathalie Ferrier, that were kind of giving this contemporary flair to Cape Cod art when they were young. This is when they were young in the 90s, or younger, I should say. And I just sort of observed this, and that's kind of how I discovered this place. My genesis of myself, I always say that I think art kind of saved me. And I'm not sure what it saved me from, whether it be like a life of boredom or conventionality. I think art enabled me to be queer. And so there was a way that when I started studying art and when I started hanging out with other artists, I thought, oh, this is interesting to me. This is a way to be that's sort of beyond kind of where I grew up in middle America. And it was really important. And again, I quickly learned through taking drawing and painting, and I took sculpture when I was in undergrad and clay, and we did everything. I realized there was a way that I could use my eyes and hands together to work through things and through that actual process of the physicality of hand, eye, action, and some kind of realization, some physical realization turning into art. I realized that I could sort of think through the world this way without kind of being involved with the traditional world of words and language, that we as artists, we have to be involved with words and language for statements, for understanding, for explaining, or contextualizing, if you will. But for me, I like this idea that art was subjective, that there wasn't an equation with a specific answer. And so I try really hard when I'm looking at art and other people's work to maintain that subjectivity in maybe a non-judgmental space before I go into any kind of like critical analysis of something.
And I want to go back to one thing you said that I found extremely interesting, where you were saying that art was a bit like sport.
Yeah.
That's a similarity that I've never really heard before. Was there like a trigger, or was there like a specific event where you felt this physicality that you could liken art with sport?
I did it, and I spoke of this on the breakthrough video I did with Amy Davies at PAM. But I did a piece where I was, dipping a basketball in ink and drawing out a basketball court. And this was 6 years ago, and I was starting to equate the two together. When I was 16 and drawing portraits of my friends and playing basketball, I didn't see a connection. It wasn't until much later on. But I think there's a way that there's a drive. Okay. Like, I have a drive to make work. I think you would probably understand this. You're prolific, you're serious about your work. There's a drive. And I wouldn't call it competition. I think there's competition that kind of happens within the art world for sure. It doesn't feel like a competition to me, but it's an obsession, a drive. that I think could also, I'm watching women's basketball, NCAA basketball right now, and I understand this desire to succeed and to, it's not even just succeed, but to do the best that I possibly can. So there's the physicality part. Like if I'm looking at this cup right here and my eyes follow the contour of the cup and my hand mimics that action, I'm drawing. I'm looking and drawing. And if a ball is coming at me and my eyes are looking at that ball and my hand is going to catch it, there's something very similar about those two things that um I do think, I wonder if we took like a survey of people who draw or people have a drawing practice who can create some kind of likeness in their drawing through looking, which is what I'm very interested in. Observational drawing that then transforms into something else on the actual picture plane. But I'm wondering if we took a bunch of athletes who don't have an art practice and we gave them drawing instruction, what would come out, especially ball athletes who are actually using and eye-hand coordination to the extreme with having to be able to catch and throw and drive and whatever they're doing with the ball. So it's something I think about. I think it was, for me, it was separate when I left sports at 16 for reasons. I wasn't very much of a team player. It really wasn't for me in a lot of ways, but um that's when I started making art. I don't know if it was art at that particular period, and I wasn't identifying as an artist. I didn't really start identifying as an artist until my early 20s. Um but those two things were separate. Like I left sports almost to be sort of passionate and involved with art or interested in it, or very curious about it, to study it, if you will. And it's only recently that I identify maybe, but I don't play as many sports as I used to, but I love sports and I always want to make more time for them. But it's something that I realize now that I kind of have a duality of my of my identity, even though I'm 51 and probably not going to be playing as many ball sports as I used to, but I think tennis is going to be my new game.
Or pickleball.
Pickleball. I do
That's what
like
everybody plays
Yes, I
here.
do play pickleball. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the non-contact thing
Yeah.
is great.
Just to go back to a thing you said for our listeners, if you don't know the Breakthrough series of videos, the Provincetown Art Association and Museum, on their YouTube channel, they have a series of small videos where they talk to local Provincetown artists about a moment of breakthrough. So I encourage you to look at that. So
And Gaston, you're on Breakthrough as well.
I know we're right next to one another.
Yeah.
Either I was before and you were after, or the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if somebody has never seen your work, how would you describe it?
Well, I do a lot of different series of work. I'll describe the work I'm doing right now, which is a series of abstract, realistic collage pieces of birds flying through space or sky or landscape. They're very inspired by the painters that I love that were actually out here in the mid 20th century. There's a lot of, I'm going to get back to the description, but there's a lot of emphasis on the Hoffman School here. And I think it's very important. And actually, I'm like probably a third generation Hoffman student because my teacher studied with Jack Torkoff, who studied with Hoffman. So we learned a lot of those principles. But some of the painters that I really admire here were involved with looking at life and recreating it in this kind of loose painterly style that was transformative and depicting pictures in a way that only painting can depict them. And those painters are James Lachey and Herman Merrill, who just had a show, and Biala. I talk about Biala a lot. She was actually a student of Hoffman, and she worked with collage quite a bit in her work, which is inspirational to me now. And the kind of weird, almost surreal still lifes of Evelyn Bodfish Bourne, historic Provincetown artist now, or Florence Brillinger. They were all these kind of realist painters in that era, maintaining realism when there was such a heaviness around abstraction. And so those have been influential. And so when you look at my work, which is usually right now I'm going to say blue, black, turquoise, which is a new color for me, turquoise, white, the hints of red, and grays. So that's the color palette. And black. I'm really like pushing the black, which is a little scary because there's an old thing in painting which came out of impressionism is we don't use black. And I've really been using black, and I think it's perhaps it has a deeper meaning than they really know. But they're these kind of singular birds that are cut out of initially cut out come from drawings, come from photographs that I take of birds in flight on the beach. Then I do ink drawings, and then I look at those ink drawings and I cut out an image of the bird in a castaway canvas that either a canvas that was found from someone else's painting or my own scrap. And I cut that image out and I place it on the surface. And so there's a collage aspect that comes into play. So to finalize it, I'd say when you look at my work, you know what you're looking at, but you don't know what you're looking at. I think you might be able to relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm assuming you might be able to relate to that. It's an interesting exercise to explain one's work without it being in front of us. And, I'm sure many painters can relate to this when you say, oh, I'm a painter, I'm a visual artist. Oh, wow. The response is, oh, wow, like, what do you paint? And it's a difficult question to answer. And you can kind of genreize it like, oh, I paint landscapes, or oh, I paint interiors, or I do abstractions, but to really think about how you might describe that, I think that's fun. I love to talk about work.
Yeah.
I love to talk about my process. So I think it comes down to, I've been saying it for years, a abstracted realism. That's is more probably about painting than it is about the subject when it comes down to it. But it's also about the subject. The birds right now, I think, I'm trying for it not to be trite, but it's really about freedom in a difficult society right now, a polarized society, and for me to recreate the action of the bird flowing through space and flying and having a sort of aerial perspective that's different from our own. It speaks to that sense of freedom, and it's always been a symbol of freedom. And I guess what I'm interested in is the surfaces are flat like paintings, and I've done assemblage work too, which is more sculptural. But I'm talking about what's happening right now that really no one's seen. Is these surfaces are kind of built because they are collage. So they're parts of paintings coming together to make new paintings. And I'm really interested in how a painting is built, like more than how a painting is made, which is probably the same thing, but different. And when I look at paintings, I'm less interested in how well a painter paints and more interested in how a painter makes a painting. But that's just my sensibility. One is not better than the other. It's just what I'm interested in terms of what I look at and what I respond to.
You mentioned earlier that you're influenced by painters from history, especially from the history of Provincetown. And when I went to your studio, that's one thing we talked about a lot. Because you were saying, well, this one is influenced by Karl Knaths, and this one is Moffat, and this one is all these others. I found that very interesting. Usually a lot of painters try to avoid mentioning these things because they're afraid to be put in a category of plagiarism or something like that. So can you talk about your interaction with history in that way?
Yeah. It is a little bit sensitive, this idea that I'm taking other painters' work and reappropriating them. I'm not like I have I don't know the whole history of Provincetown art. I'm still learning, and I always say, like, I'm not a historian. I'm not an art historian. I'm a painter who likes to look at paintings, And, an art historian is someone who has degrees and has scholarly research to come up with new um, discoveries about something or a work of art or a historical time. More recently, I rewind to 2021, which was really a difficult time. It was still the pandemic. And I had done these kind of odd, um, like probably the most surreal work I've ever done. This like sort of subconscious, unconscious memory paintings, if you will. They did not come from life, which was very odd. And I thought they were so bizarre that I put them away. And I thought, I don't really know what I want to be doing right now, which is rare for me because I have a lot of ideas. And I just started making collages of paintings that I liked from other painters. And I was like more known painters like Matisse and Egon Schill and David Park and Diebenkorn and some others, Biala, who I mentioned. And it was a way of kind of, reproductions historically were done to teach oneself how to paint, like people painting in the Louvre. They were doing that to learn how to paint. And I was trying to work with collage for the first time, and it just felt comfortable for me to visit that with other painters' work. And during that time, I thought, okay, is this okay that I'm doing this? But I was using other material, and sometimes the paintings would look very similar, and sometimes they would come out more transformative. And that's been going on for a long time, that painters have been using other people's work and, how transformative can they get? And I don't have interest in doing a reproduction of another artist's work, but I do think that it's important for me to do it because part of my practice is a deep looking practice. And I look at art. I don't know if I look at art more than I paint, but I go away, I travel to go look at art, and I'm, constantly looking at books, and I look at things online, um and I particularly just like classical art too. Right now I'm looking at Courbet, and my most recent appropriation is a Courbet wave I did in a woodcut. And but back to the Provincetown painters, I think it was a way I was kind of like, well, I don't really know that much. I mean, I know the basics. I know the Charles Hawthorne, I know the Hoffman, I know Blanche Lazelle. I know those like three very important artists that came through here. And other kind of all of the other sort of subordinate greats that are associated with Motherwell, and he definitely Motherwell wasn't subordinate, but the basics. But I was kind of like, well, who else was here? And like, who else was doing things? And you can follow the history of Provincetown art very well through Pam. And you can also follow it through Bacher Gallery because of the auctions, and their gallery is devoted to historical artists. And there's collectors here. And I always think about, I've heard people say like, in the 90s, people were going to garage sales and finding Moffats and Ross Moffats and all these other painters. And that's kind of over because of the internet. But back to it, I kind of just wanted to start reappropriating Provincetown painters' work as like a way to archive my investigation of these painters. And I'm not really doing it in this moment. Am I doing it? Yeah, I just did a Milton Avery wave. I just did one of his waves on a smaller scale. But the birds I just spoke of, they're my own designs. And then the appropriation pieces are also my own designs because I take a Bruce McCain Wharf. He was a lesser known painter that was out here. I don't know the year. I'm going to say the 40s, and I could be incorrect on that. He did monotypes, which I also really like to do. And I've just taken some of his images and made these kind of shapely assemblage paintings of assemblage sculpture paintings, wall sculptures, if you will, as a way to really break him down and see how he was seen. And I've with Biala. I'm really interested in how she was seen, how she worked with collage at a time when I don't think many people were working with collage at all. And there's a collage scene here in Provincetown. There's people doing collage, and Karen Capato is
There's an upcoming show.
there's a show,
Yeah.
and Paul Rizzo does collage, and there's folks doing collage, but it's not. If you went into the history of collage, there's not a lot about it. I mean, you go back to Kurt Schwitters in Germany, and a professor was asking me like, "Hey, who are the collage artists I should be teaching?" And I was like, "Well, that's a good question."
Well, there's all the early Soviet ones like Gustav Klutzis
yeah,
and the ones creating that 1920s Soviet realism art. That was all collage.
that
as
was
well.
all collage.
Yeah.
Oh, I should look at that some more.
Yeah.
I don't know much about that era.
I love that I can talk art history with you.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. It's really
Yeah.
fun. Yeah,
For people like us who are both artists and also deeply interested by history, I think it's just natural that we look at art and it creates inspiration.
Mhm.
It creates sort of a drive to create more art. Because I've had the same thing with work created by Marston Hartley here in town.
yeah,
It spurred a whole lot of work in my gallery that I'm still creating, hundreds of
that's
pieces
interesting.
that I've made because I saw work that Marston Hartley did here, and I decided to sort of inscribe myself in the continuity.
Yeah,
He was doing it here. I was inspired by his work, and I want to continue what he was doing, but doing it my own way.
yeah,
And it's sort of inscribing myself in this continuity of Provincetown and artists here. So yeah, I've had that as well. But when people come to my gallery, I often feel like I almost have to apologize. Like,
yeah.
well, it's inspired by Marston Hartley, but it's not the same as him. It's I borrow some of his ideas, but they're my own. So yeah, it's a line that we have to thread.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's this idea that painters are in conversation with each other through histories. And I didn't know. I know Marston Hartley's work to a degree, and I didn't know that your work was inspired by Marston Hartley. But now that you say it, it actually broadens the meaning for me of your work, and I can see it. And I'm like, I had a little chill when you said that because I got it. And I think that I think as painters, we want to be in a conversation with who came before. And delicately as not to copy, which is not what we're doing. But it's always a question of originality. And but that conversation I think has been going on for decades, for
Forever,
eons.
really.
Forever. Yeah.
Because even if you look back at the Renaissance, they were copying the work from people before them. It's always
Right.
been
Right.
happening.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we can only learn from one another.
Yeah.
It's not like if we're gonna,
You can't work in a vacuum.
we're
Yeah.
just gonna cosmically create something brand new right away.
Right.
We just are, influenced by what comes before us.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's a way that to use another artist's work in your work to make new work it's not like a responsibility, but it's part of painting. It's part of it. For example, Milton Avery did a lot of birds, and I'm not appropriating his birds. I have, but Milton Avery appropriated the birds of George Brock. And so that to me, it gives me agency to appropriate Milton's birds because Milton appropriated Brock's birds. And I don't know, Brock's birds might have come from, some Egyptian bird sculpture that he saw in a museum. We don't know where they came from, but there's a lineage. If someone were doing this with my work when I'm dead, when I'm gone, would I want them to do that? Absolutely, yes. I would want someone to be looking at my work and making an interpretation of it. So that's when I think it's fine.
Yeah, that's a very good way of looking
Yeah.
at it.
Hartley would be so happy that you're working with his paintings.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
And 2 of these paintings just made it into the permanent collection at the museum. They're on the wall right now.
They look great. Yeah.
So are there other artists that you're hoping to work with symbolically in the next few years?
Just more immediately, I'm gonna do I have a residency at the Margot Gelb Shack this summer through the the Provincetown Consortium, I'm gonna kinda look at who Margot and Gail were, and if there's some way that I can find information about other artists that have been in that shack. It could be recent artists, like someone that was there last year or someone that was there 40 years ago. I'm going to look at their work, and during the residency, I might do some kind of project based on what the ones that I find that are kind of resonating with me. Um, I I mean, not Provincetown art, but I just mentioned Courbet. I'm very enchanted with Courbet right now. Um, his waves and his portraiture, and I don't know that I will continue to do wave paintings based on Courbet, but that's the immediate draw because we're looking. I am. I'll just speak for myself, and I imagine many other people are. We're looking at waves quite a bit out here, and there's a way that he conveyed movement and the depth of color of a wave that, I think that I would like to portray somehow. But in terms of Provincetown artists, that's a good question. I don't have one in my studio right now. Um, but there was a painter, um, I mentioned Evelyn Bodfish Bourne. Weird paintings, and weird in a good way. Really painted acutely, in other words, was able to look at life and recreate it with an acute likeness. But again, there's something about they were just really paintings and paintings that transformed reality. And in a way, she showed how her paintings were built. Um, and I haven't. Oh, I did a couple years ago. Reappropriate one of her. She did a strange house piece with a brick. It's in the Pam collection with a brick chimney. I think it's called Chimney House. I turned it into a monotype, and I think her piece looks much better than my monotype. But it was like I don't know if you ever experienced this that you make a piece and you think, "Oh gosh, that's not very great." And then you bring it out 2 years later and you're like, "Oh yeah,
Oh, all the time.
I think
All the
that's got
time.
something." Or it could go the opposite way, which is, you leave the studio at night and you're like, "This is fabulous." And then you come back and you're like, "Oh, not so great." There's a real back and forth with that. But I just brought out that print I appropriated of Bourne's chimney house, and it looks much better. And it was just a moment. So I'm kind of interested in like the space between creation and then putting it away and coming back and seeing potential or not. And then that's where a lot of my work become scraps of other paintings to make collage.
So, Megan, as I mentioned at the beginning, a few weeks ago, I went to your studio, and I have to say, I was so enchanted. It's such a beautiful, wonderful space. Can you tell us more about your working space?
Yeah, I pinch myself every time I go into my space. I acquired the building, the barn, and it was probably there aren't records because the Registry of Deeds in Barnstable burned down, and I don't know what year this was. I want to say like the 60s, and that could be wrong. Um, so there's no real historical record of this barn, which sits right on Castle Road. It's
Truro.
in Truro. Yeah, thank you. It's probably around 1850 and could have been a horse barn or a barn for a larger swath of land that was out there at the time. And there was a very old house next to it that it might have been associated with. Um, it has barn wood all over. It smells like wood. Um, every angle and corner is asymmetrical. Nothing's really plumb, and it's just it feels like a historical space. And I have had the space now for 5 years, but I had only started working in it 2 years ago because it had no heat and or water for that matter. So that I had to figure out how to get that in there, and it took a while. It's my studio space where I work, but it's also turned into a showroom for me in the summer. And I put a little picture window, which I call my window gallery, out front on the street so people can drive by or walk by or cycle by and see a painting. And it's brought more people to the studio. And I feel when people like yourself, you wanted to come by, I want to show people the space because there's a feeling to it that's special. And I think it gives people a better understanding of my work. I think the barn, which I call it, actually gave me permission to work more with found wood and found material and paint on found wood and do assemblage paintings of found wood in a way that I didn't foresee.
Yeah, because you were telling me that you, through renovation,
Yeah.
both of your barn and your house,
Yeah.
you were finding all these scraps of wood that you were thinking you could do something with.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Well, the carpenters, we had a house across the street, Paul and I, that we were trying to restore, and we did restore it. And in the process, some of the carpenters immediately in the beginning started throwing some of these, 2 foot, 1 foot scraps of wood from the 18th century into the dumpster. And I thought, oh, this cannot be. This can't. This would, I need to keep these things. And I didn't know that I was going to paint on them. I quickly started painting, and this was not appropriation. This was of my own design. Scenes from the old house, the pre-renovation, the post-renovation. I just started painting. I, sand the surface down a tiny bit, clean it up, and do oil paintings, and started challenging myself with this somewhat difficult surface to paint on because it's very textured. But I liked how the paint accepted that texture and created that kind of nostalgia. This was right around the time I got the barn because we had the house first. And I remember I had some of those paintings and I had the barn like maybe the first couple of weeks, and I hung one of those paintings in the barn, and it was just like this moment of sort of clarity, connection, understanding of kind of where I wanted to go next. And after that series, I started thinking about how different components of these pieces of wood can make more dimensional wall sculptures that recreated what I call genre scenes of things I'm looking at. And that's the show I had this past summer at Farm Projects in Wellfleet of called Back to Mine, which was an indication that I was painting scenes from my home and exiting or abandoning for a second other artists' work and just generating these own scenes. And I think the barn walls and the way that it feels really, I don't know very specifically how it did it, but it helped to inspire and infuse this work together. So I think without the barn, I'd be in a different place. And prior to that, I worked for almost 18 years, 16 years in Wellfleet in a beautiful space, gallery, studio that was very whitewashed and more contemporary and had tons of light, more light than I have now. And it just had a different feeling. Floors were cement, walls were just plain old white walls, new windows and all that. Did some really great series there, but I think it's interesting, like your intro, how space affects work, studio affects work. And I think one has to, in a studio, I've been there for 2 years, and it's just now that I'm feeling really comfortable in there. It took me a while, even though I was just kind of mesmerized by the barn and that it's antique quality and it's rough hewn nature, if you will. It's just now that I kind of feel settled into it.
I think about that all the time, how space affects my work, because
Mm.
my studio is also my gallery. So I actually have only a very small corner in which I work. And I keep on thinking, if I could use the whole space, I could do this, I could do that. Would I do this differently? So I think about that a lot.
Yeah.
One thing also that I saw in your work that I think is inspired by your new space is the fact that your paintings stopped being square or
Yeah.
rectangular.
Yeah.
You started using more Baroque shapes for your
Oh,
paintings.
that's a great word.
Yeah.
Baroque shapes, like dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny now because I'm actually making square rectilinear paintings of birds, or they're collage pieces that are on that format. And I'll probably go back to assemblage. I have ideas. Yeah, I just wanted to challenge the idea of the rectangle and why painting is in this format. And I've talked about it before, and I thought another thing I'm interested in this idea of skill building as an artist. Like, how do we build skills? I mean, you want to do a project and you need to learn how to knit, or you want to do a project and you need to learn how to cook, and how these skills kind of come together with art. Or maybe you're doing a performance piece and you need to learn how to tap dance, for example. Um, and for me, it was using tools, power tools, and I had some knowledge of it. And I'm not a carpenter at all. I'm more of like a painter who learned rough carpentry, like how to make a stretcher bar. But it was important for me to know how to make cuts and to use other tools to make a painting. And um, I think there's a way that there's again, it goes back to built painting, but like this idea of placement that changes. When we're working in a square or rectangle, there's placement is always important, but placement becomes dimensionalized. And how far do you sort of play around with form until you fuse it all together with glue or screws? There's these sort of questions that come up, like, how can I achieve this arrangement um, without yet committing to putting it all together? So probably also something about renovating, remaking. A lot of times in my assemblage work and my collage work, I'll put a piece of wood on, and then 5 weeks later it comes off and something new goes in. And with my collage pieces, I'll put on a big piece of canvas, I'll glue that onto another piece of canvas, and then I'll rip it off in a few weeks because I don't think it's working. So I've always talked about working correctively, and meaning kind of editing, I guess. And I think that the assemblage work is very much rooted in that, and it's just another part of my overall oeuvre.
And you talked about the light in your studio. You said you have less light now, but when I
Mm.
was there, the light was just
Well,
gorgeous.
yeah.
Well, it was full of snow outside.
Yeah.
The sun was reflecting off the snow. So do you sort of plan your work based on when there's light coming in and where the light's coming from?
Yeah, you're right. The light is quite nice. I shouldn't say it's not good. I like to work in the afternoon in there because the light's really coming in. I actually think I would prefer to have more of a morning practice, just because I think the space of my my head is more malleable, or is not so full. But I think I really enjoy the afternoon light in there. So I work right around anywhere between like noon and this time of year would be maybe up to 6 o'clock, but not necessarily that long, but in that bracket. And if I'm lucky, every once in a while I go in the morning and actually do work. I might do like desk work in the morning, or exercise in the morning, or walk the dog or something like that. So,
You do everything in there.
yeah, I do everything. I'm in there a lot.
That's good. I think a lot of artists, they aim for that,
Mhm.
to have a studio in which they can be in a lot and feel comfortable to work in
I think
and
it's
just
really
be in.
important. Yeah, a studio. When I have students, particularly my adult students, they say they crave having a studio space, and I kind of ask them like, "Well, what's your house like? Do you have like a somewhere?" And it's kind of a discovery, like, "Oh yeah, like maybe I could set up a space there." And I said, "You need a space to just walk into. You don't want to have to set up your paints every time. You want to be able to just walk into that space that's yours to make when you're ready."
Okay, Megan, we're arriving at the end of the interview, so you know what that means.
Speed round.
Speed round. Okay, first one. Paris or London?
Paris.
Yeah.
I love them both, but well, Paris, I always say this is my line for Paris. Paris is so Paris. There's nothing like Paris. And London's actually become a much more. I studied abroad in London when I was in college. I studied there for a year, and loved it. It's become a much more international city. It's much more of a global city. But Paris, why Paris? Because in any given day, you could see two great exhibits, have two great cups of coffee, um, and kind of get lost in like the overt neoclassicism, wonderful shopping, and there's just like a general and my favorite art supply store is there, Sennelier, one of my favorites. And there's just a general air of romanticism. And as a passionate person, um, that really resonates with me. And also, I just love the history of particularly the Belle Époque, the early painters from the early 1900s. And I love that that was there. And I love the French language.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, good.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I have a great love for Paris as well, but I lived in Europe for nearly 2 decades,
Mm,
and I had never really been to London. I went a few years ago, spent 9 days there, and I just adored it.
yeah.
But I'm really craving to go to Paris now,
Mm.
so if anybody wants to give me a gift, I'm open for donations. I really wanna go to Paris soon. Okay, second question. Working on wood or working on paper?
Wood.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, they're both kind of the same thing, but different because their paper comes from wood.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, like this is like apples and oranges in Paris and London, wood and paper. I do both and I love both. But wood, if we're talking about painting, also just bottom line logistics, working on paper causes display issues of like framing and glass. And then putting the work behind glass, which is protective but a barrier.
Mhm.
So there's that, and wood. If I were just doing straight up what I call direct painting, which is just painting with a brush, I would prefer to work on a panel more than any other surface. So I love wood. I love the grain. I love the smell. I love um, uh, joinery. I love found wood with bits of remnants of paint on it. So my answer is wood.
And speaking of paper, that's one of the reasons I switched to, not the only reason, but one of the reasons I switched to only painting 7 or 8 years ago because I was dealing a lot with photo paper and collages
Right.
and yeah, framing and glazing and
Yeah.
UV rays. Oh,
All of it.
it was tiring.
Yeah.
Next question:
Mm,
spring or fall?
fall.
Hmm.
Yeah. Although there's a melancholy to fall, I must say that's a little challenging. But um color palette wise, and we year rounders here really love the fall. We get a break from the which I'm not averse to the summer crowd. I think it's really important part of this place. But there's always a big sigh of relief out here. And my birthday's in the fall. I'm a Libra.
Me too.
Oh, you are? October 9?
October 3rd.
Oh, wow. Okay, we'll talk a year later.
Okay.
It's just a kind of I think it's a reflective time, and I always kind of uh evaluate like maybe what just happened, the year's coming to an end, people are getting ready for the holidays. It's special. So I'm choosing fall.
Yeah, my answer is pretty much identical to
Oh,
yours.
good.
So if you had to time travel,
Mm.
would you time travel to the past or the future?
The past for certain. Yeah. I would not. I don't think I'd travel to the future at this rate.
Uh-huh.
I would travel. Well, I just mentioned the Belle Époque. I would probably love to be in Paris and anywhere between 1900 and 1950. There were a number of also New York artists, like Ellsworth Kelly, for example, who lived in Paris and
Right after World War II.
yeah, and they were there kind of because there was such an important legacy of artists that had come from there, and I think it probably was cheap and kind of like feels like in the winter it would be sort of cold and you'd be in like a cold studio with a scarf on and communing and knocking on each other's doors, pre phones, pre anyone even having a phone in a particular studio or house. I'd also love to travel back to antiquity. I think that would just be mind blowing to be observing and living with Greek or in Greek or Roman society. It's because it was there was so much ingenuity going on, which is why the Renaissance happened because they were rebirthing the classics.
And speaking of Ellsworth Kelly, there's a book, but it's about the artists of the Coenties Slip
Oh, I've
in
read
New
it.
York.
The Slip.
Yeah, it's called The Slip, and they have a few chapters about Ellsworth Kelly in Paris when
Yeah.
he was a young man. It's just so beautiful.
You read the book?
I did.
I love this book.
It was I actually did a few years ago. I did a little pilgrimage, went to the spot on Coenties
Oh, you
Slip
did?
and sat there for a while, just trying to feel it. But of
Yeah.
course, nowadays it doesn't look at all like it used to back then. But still,
You probably are a bit influenced by Kelly. I mean, just in terms of
hard edge.
Hard edge, yeah.
Okay, last question. This is the most important one. Sushi or tacos?
Oh, jeez. This is like a seasonal question. Depends on the day. I'm going to choose tacos.
Okay.
Yeah. I like both. Tacos, I think, I like variety and I like changing things up, much like I do with my work. And you can have a taco made of anything, really. And there can be any type of ingredients in tacos. And it's also a quick, fun dinner. So that's my answer.
Okay, well, I'll have the sushi then.
Okay, you have sushi, but I want to have sushi with you.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you in the studio with me today.
Thanks, Gaston.
And if people want to know more about Megan Hinton, where should they go?
MeganHinton.com. MEGANHINTON.com. That's my website.
And
touch with me there.
On Instagram?
At Mega, MEGA Hinton, HINTON.
Yeah, because I was looking for you earlier, and there's
no N.
There's other Megan Hintons, but you're Mega
Mega Hinton, yeah.
So great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I wish you a most wonderful upcoming spring and summer.
You as well, Gaston. Thanks.
And thank you all for joining us today.